Thanks, Nolani. Before I just give the formal introduction here, let me just say one more thing about FSSO. I assume you're here because you're interested in exploring a career in diplomacy. FSSO, again, is designed to help you do that. Next week, they're holding their signature event in the Hinckley Center. It's also known as a cheap date. Okay, they call it an evening of diplomacy, and it's really just a simulated diplomatic reception where you can see how well you can work the room. There will be a few current, at least one current Foreign Service officer. I don't know if we're going to be able to keep Mr. Wilson here another week, but we'll have Mr. Jeff Houvenir, who'll be here from Greece as one of our honored guests. We'll also have a number of retired Foreign Service officers and others who spent careers in military or government who live in the Wasatch Front. It'll be a best dressed kind of attire, and I'm sure in the spirit of Ambassador David Kennedy, we'll have ginger ale and tomato juice to class things up so you can work the room in style. But again, at the Hinckley Center, 7 p.m. We'd asked. I don't believe there's an RSVP, but is there? All right, let's put that up there. There we go. RSVP just here at the main desk. Welcome to bring a date. There will be hors d'oeuvres and beautiful music. And again, it's just an opportunity to interact and to network and to hone your interpersonal skills. We'll also be passing around a sign-up list. Maybe you heard about this through the FSO list, but if you didn't, you can join that list. And as I mentioned, next week we'll be having another event just like this. One of the benefits of BYU is there are quite a few Latter-day Saint Foreign Service officers that we know of, and we're always learning about new ones along the way. Just less than a month ago, I believe, Mr. Wilson joined the Kennedy Center's LinkedIn group, and I noticed that he was a Master's of Arts graduate from the Kennedy Center, and so I just put out the offer that I do to any of our alums. I said, we would love to have you at the Kennedy Center if you happen to be passing through from Kabul. Provo is always a good stop-off point in your logical trip, and just so happened that he was in the neighborhood and was kind enough to oblige, and so that's how we were able to meet with Mr. Wilson today. He is a career diplomat with 15 years of service in Taipei, Taiwan, Tokyo, Japan, Hong Kong, China, and Adana, Turkey. Currently, he's a political officer in Kabul, Afghanistan, working on political military affairs. Prior to joining the diplomatic corps, he received an MA in Asian Studies from the Kennedy Center and a Master of International Management from the Thunderbird School of Global Management, which, by the way, will be hosting a career session this month, I believe, in March. March 10th, thank you. So there's another plug for your other alma mater, if you're interested in that. Wilson, who's a Seattle native, and his wife are the parents of 5 children. His son is with us today. No other children here, I'm guessing. He'll be talking about life inside the Foreign Service. Again, it's a topic that we hear about a lot, but it's always interesting to hear the particular perspectives of someone who has had such an interesting and an exciting opportunity for a career. So please join me in welcoming Mr. Andy Wilson.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure for me to be here back at my alma mater. I was just sitting there thinking how long it's been since I've actually been in this room. I guess it's been a few years. I came in here and saw a talk on intercultural communication training and so forth. I can't remember when that was. I was trying to remember, but I almost forgot how, when I was walking over here from the parking lot, I almost forgot how to get here. I had to think twice because so much has changed. Yes, just to let you know how I came about, like what Corey said, how I came about being here is I came here on the 22nd or 23rd of December to just as an R&R out of Kabul. My wife and I came over to spend some time over Christmas with our kids, and during that, on the 31st, during that period, I had a slight ski accident, blew out my ACL on my right knee, and had to end up getting surgery. Well, that made me lose my medical clearance to be able to return to Kabul because they don't have any facilities over there at our embassy to be able to handle such injuries. So I've been here for the past 2 months recovering, and I just got clearance. Just before I came to Provo today, I just got clearance from my doctor to be able to return, so I'll probably be returning in a few days. If you see me hobbling around, it's just because I'm still a little bit weak-kneed, shall we say. But it's been an interesting 2 months of ups and downs, but it's been great to be around my family members. And I've been staying up with in Camas with where my mother is currently staying. My mother and my sister are up there. The Foreign Service. I am happy to see so many. I told Washington when I had to get clearance to be able to come here and speak, because they're always afraid that I might say something wrong, and if there's going to be press here and all that. But I had to assure them that everything was going to be safe and on the up and up, and that I would be talking only about things about my impressions of life in the Foreign Service. And after I get done here today, I'll talk for a few minutes, and I want to keep this really low key and kind of informal. And then after that, I'll open it up to questions and answers. And please feel free to ask any kind of questions you want. I'll probably be pretty general. If I even know the answer, I'll probably be pretty general on answers to questions about American foreign policy, because that is something that we have people at much higher pay grades than I do that are supposed to be making public announcements about. But I'd be glad to give you my personal impressions and any disclaimer that would be appropriate. The Foreign Service, let me just start out by saying that the Foreign Service, for me as an individual, has probably been one of the best decisions in my life. I wasn't raised in the Foreign Service. I wasn't raised in the military, so we didn't move around. We moved around the United States a lot, so I was used to moving and changing homes and so forth. But my first time overseas, my first time on an airplane, was when I was 19 years old, going to Taipei, Taiwan as a missionary. And that literally, that experience, as for many of us, that literally changed my life, because it introduced me to literally the world. And I learned a foreign language. I learned that other people think differently than I do. I learned that there is such a thing as people like ambassadors, or other ambassadorial or diplomatic type positions that represent the United States, both at the government level as well as at the business and private level. It's been a wonderful career for me. Again, I've been in for almost 15 years now. Corey mentioned the places that I've lived: Taiwan, Japan, Hong Kong, Turkey, and now Afghanistan. And I've had numerous opportunities to fly to some other places as well. A little bit later, I'll talk about, or perhaps I should let my son, who's here, talk a little bit about how the effects of foreign service life on family, which are both good and bad. But I think, in my opinion, it's been a great career. Let me tell you a little bit about, and I'm assuming that many of you, since it's a Foreign Service Student Association, many of you probably already are very well aware, probably more up to date than I am, on the whole recruitment process into the United States Foreign Service. And let me make very clear that I work for the State Department. Everybody's going, yeah, right. That's always the impression that people have when you tell them that I'm a political officer with the State Department. They all automatically assume I work for what we call other government agency. I can assure you, ladies and gentlemen, that I am a garden variety State Department Foreign Service officer, and I am happy to say so, though I have great respect for my other government agency colleagues. And believe me, the other government agency lifestyle, I can assure you, from what I can tell from my colleagues, is not what you see on The Bourne Identity and other movies and TV shows, though some parts of it might come close. But my life as a Foreign Service officer started when I took, as it would with you if you're interested in joining, when I took the Foreign Service exam. The exam, as I understand it, has changed since I took it a little bit. I mean, obviously the content changes probably from year to year. And I'm not going to say a lot about details, frankly, because it's been 15 years since I took it, and I haven't really kept up with some of the changes. But I can give you a kind of a general outline of the recruitment process as I saw it, and I think it's relatively similar today, and then go on and talk about the lifestyle itself. Again, the exam, start everything with state.gov. Just remember state.gov. Many of you probably already know that. That's where you go, and if you go to click on the careers section, they'll tell you you can answer just about any conceivable question about the exam, the recruitment process, how it all works step by step. It's a great website, and you can sign up now. When I took it, it was only offered once a year in early December. It's offered multiple times a year now, as I understand it, and it covers essentially the same kind of territory within the test that it did when I took it, as I understand. Again, there's 3 parts to the written test. There's the English language part, there's the kind of general knowledge part, and then there is kind of your own biographical information part. Everybody thinks that, well, the biographical information, that's not really a test. That's just telling you what you already know about yourself, telling the Foreign Service what you already know about yourself. But they always get hung up on the general knowledge part, thinking, hearing all these stories and so forth about, you got to know the difference between a Rembrandt painting and a Jackson Pollock, and you have to be able to represent the United States well, and you have to know who was the architect for the blah de blah building in Washington D.C. or whatever. And there's questions like that on the test, but a lot of it's going to emphasize management, economics, international political economy, world affairs, a lot of American history, and there will be a fair amount of American culture on there. Now, when I took it, they had these really strange questions about, they'd set up a scenario, and you are a consular officer in whatever country, and this and this and this happens, and how would you respond to these questions and that type of thing? I have absolutely no idea, because I've never been a consular officer up to that point. And they're looking for how would you, just given what you know, given the information that you know, how would you respond, kind of thing. I don't know how many of those kind of questions they still maintain on the test, but I know that management has been a big emphasis in recent years. And let me just, as an aside, tell you the reason for that is because the Foreign Service, within the Foreign Service, most of us are reporting officers, and especially in the political cone as well as the economic cone. Those are the 2 main reporting cones in the Foreign Service. They call them cones, or kind of sections. And we are notoriously bad managers in those cones because we spend so much of our career doing nothing but reporting on, going out and gathering information and then reporting back to Washington on it. And, we learn how to be, State Department writers and good diplomats and so forth. But when it comes time for us later in our careers to actually manage a reporting section or manage people or programs, we haven't really had that much experience. And so now there's the management cone. Those people tend to be good managers because they usually come in with a kind of a management background. And there's also the consular cone, which gives you an opportunity early on in your career to be able to do a lot of management. So consequently, long answer to a short question, why so much management emphasis on the test is because the State Department needs people who at least know about or have some background in management principles. And that might even be included on the test in some kind of a question like, Taylorism or something like that all, basic management 101 kind of questions. If you've ever taken a management course, you know what I'm talking about, just so that you have a familiarity with it. That's really all I want to say about that, but it's just don't be surprised about the questions on that. But I want to tell you, on the test, and I think this continues to be the same today, a lot of people assume that it's going to be the general knowledge section of the test that's going to trip you up. It's probably going to be the English language section. Everybody says, well, I'm a native English speaker. I don't have to worry about that. So they don't. They don't worry about it. They don't prepare for it. And that tends to be the part that tends to trip people up, even college graduates. You think, well, I graduated from college. I wrote a lot of papers in college. I know how to write. But you'll find that there's writing and there's writing, and it depends on who wrote the test. And whoever wrote the test, that's the type of writing you need to do. And it's the State Department that wrote the test, and that's the type of writing that they're looking for. So don't just kind of pass off the writing section, or I should say the English language section. It gets down into nitty-gritty details about, sentence structure and grammar and all kinds of things. Who in here, by the way, has taken the test? Has anybody taken it? Yeah, so you could probably speak with much more authority than I can about the current content of the test. But it tends to be that. If you pass the test, and I understand now, and they didn't have this when I came in, there is a personal statement that you're supposed to write, and it's kind of you kind of write a letter or a statement about who you are and how your experience, how you think your experience and your languages and whatever skills you have will contribute to the Foreign Service. And then you'll be able to take the oral assessment. And the oral assessment is a tough one, but it's the one that really gets into nitty-gritty specific skills that the State Department thinks Foreign Service officers should have. And this includes, of course, now, again, let me remind you, people who are going into political reporting or economic reporting or consular affairs or management affairs or public affairs. And also the Foreign Commercial Service. Is it true that I shouldn't ask this, but you guys who took the test, you would know, is the test still being used for the Foreign Commercial Service? It's not. Thank you. Okay, that's a good thing to know. It was when I took it, and our Foreign Commercial Service officers, who usually come up with a fairly strong business or economics background, come into it that way, but I don't know how they do it now. So you take has anybody here taken the oral assessment? Okay. If it's done the same way, and I'm pretty sure that it is, at least in general outline, the same way that it went when I went through it, was they bring you, it's usually an all-day affair. There's a group of you who have signed up for that particular day, and you have some senior level Foreign Service officers, experienced Foreign Service officers, who will be assessing you for the day. And there's like 5 or 6 different sections to the test, and you go from like room to room or whatever, and there's a lunch break during the day. It includes a fairly heavy writing section. Again, writing is extremely important in the Foreign Service. In all cones in the Foreign Service, writing is extremely important. And the exercise, a lot of them are role play type things, but this one is they'll give you a packet. You have to read through the packet. You're given a specific amount of time. You have to read through the packet. Then you have to be able to summarize in an executive type summary, what you have just read, and be able to glean out of quite a bit of information what's most important for what you think an ambassador or a senior executive level person might need to know from that information. And you have a fairly limited amount of time to do that in. It's like a 250-word type essay that you have to write, or piece of summary. And then you go into another room, and you'll be put into a mock situation of where you are doing a démarche, which is like you're representing on a particular issue. You will get a briefing packet for the démarche and give you background, and you're supposed to go in and basically tell members of your host government's ministry that you want to do this, this, and this, or you're requesting to do whatever, and they're obviously going to be appalled and so forth at your requests, and you have to be able to handle it. And they want to see if you make sure that you don't give away American sovereignty or anything like that during the interview or during the mock situation, and just kind of how you handle it and how you try to handle the situation. And then another one, you'll be put in front of a panel of senior Foreign Service officers, and they will fire different questions at you about how would you handle this, or what would you do if, kind of things in real life situations. The common question would be, you are a management officer at a large embassy, and a very senior Foreign Service national, that is a local national who's working for the embassy, who has been there a long time and probably makes more money than the ambassador himself, needs to retire. And how would you handle this? And it's a very, very sensitive thing because he's so well known and so well liked and so forth. And how would you handle such and such a situation? Or an American basketball team shows up in your country, and 3 of them, the team goes out on a bender, and 3 of them get thrown in jail. And how are you going to handle this with the local police, or something like that? And just they want to see how you'd respond to some of these questions. And there's not necessarily right or wrong answers. They just want to see if your answers are reasonable, and sound reasonable, and you're not doing something really egregious. You don't just come up with something off the wall, and they want to see that you're putting some thought into it. Another role play that you'll go into is you'll be in a negotiating situation. You'll sit with other people who are being tested around a table, and each of you is given a packet, and you role play a particular person in an embassy and with a particular project, and there's usually a fund of money that is available, and you have to negotiate. Before you get out of that negotiation, you have to negotiate which projects will be funded and by how much. And this tests your skills at being, give and take, negotiation, that type of thing, and your willingness to be able to compromise, and some of the different skills. All these skills are skills that you would need in the Foreign Service. And, of course, there's officers sitting around assessing you all the time. And they may have other things as well. I remember early on they used to have what they call an inbox test. They don't do that anymore. Usually some business schools used to require the inbox test, where you get this huge packet of information. You have to go through it, and you have to decide where different pieces of paper go within the embassy. But I don't know how they would expect anybody who's never worked in an embassy to know that. So they actually dropped that part of the oral assessment. And I hope they didn't bring it back, because it was really kind of silly. But the idea is, from the oral assessment, is they want to see if you have a basic set of skills that they don't expect you to be, obviously to be able to think like an experienced Foreign Service officer, but they want to see if you have a good skill set to be able to kind of go in that direction, and you're a reasonable person, and that you are not going to say something that would egregiously misrepresent the United States. And then, obviously, if you pass that, when I went through, they tell you on the same day, on the day of the oral assessment, you'd sit around and they'd say, okay, come back in a couple hours. We're going to sit around and talk about it. We're going to see if we're going to let you know. And if they let you know that you passed it that same day, they'll probably give you a kind of interview, and they'll say, okay, are you willing to serve wherever overseas, wherever we want you to serve overseas, and you're going to have to go through a medical exam from now, and you'll also have to go through a background check to get your security clearance. And then once you pass all those things, if you sign on the dotted line of your willingness to serve, and if you are medically cleared, which I wasn't until today, to actually serve overseas, but I mean that they're very, very concerned about your ability to be able, if you have any medical conditions or anything that would keep you from serving in certain posts overseas, because not all posts have the facilities to be able to handle all kinds of medical conditions. So they have to be very, very careful about that. And then if you pass your background check and you get a top secret security clearance, all those things, then your name is put on a register. And they draw your names. It could be on there for anywhere from 6 months to a year, year and a half. I think there's a limitation of time. And then they draw your name off a register, and they say, would you like to join our A100 class on such and such a date? And if your life and opportunity allow it, then you'll say yes and you'll go. But maybe by then, you've gotten a new job making millions, and you don't want to go for the Foreign Service after that, and you say no thanks. But it's a fairly long process, and you don't put all of. I guess one piece of advice is don't put all of your eggs in that basket. If you start down the Foreign Service exam route, don't be putting all of your career eggs in that basket. Have options, have other options, because again, it's a very long process and it's a very highly competitive process. But I want to tell you that it's one, in my opinion, that it's one that is certainly worthwhile. If you are interested in a Foreign Service career, the State Department is a great way to go. There's other agencies besides the CIA. There's Foreign Commercial Service. There's Foreign Agricultural Service. There's a number of other agencies who regularly send people overseas. Their career paths can be slightly different than the State Department's. The State Department is generally considered like the premier one, because that's what we do. We spend most of our lives overseas, and I was telling colleagues at lunch today that it's usually considered necessary, especially for a reporting officer like an economics officer or a political officer, to have at least one or maybe two tours in Washington, D.C., to come back to Washington, D.C. I've been raising 5 kids overseas. It's cheaper to raise kids overseas, so we stayed overseas. I have never been to Washington in my nearly 15 years of service. I will do that this summer for the first time. That's unusual. Usually on your second or third tour, you'll go to Washington. But I chose to stay overseas. And now, I'm hoping it doesn't hurt my career too much, but I'm going to be serving this summer on the Canada desk. A little lower stress job than what I'm serving in now. I'll be, Northwest Passage and, Arctic security are a little lower stress than the Taliban. And then after Washington, I'll probably go back overseas again. Maybe, who knows? I would like to go back to China. I'd like to go back to East Asia. That's where I started my career, was in East Asia, and I'd like to go back there. I am a Chinese speaker, and they're always looking for Chinese speakers, so getting a job over there shouldn't be that difficult. Let me just say a word, just for your own information, about once you're in the Foreign Service, kind of how your career goes as a Foreign Service officer. Like I said, you're going to be spending most of your life overseas. Now, there have been some officers who have special situations. Many of you probably know John Dinkelman. You've probably met him. I'm sure he's spoken here at least once or twice, whatever. He had a special situation with special family needs. He had a child who required special services and special attention that wasn't available at very many posts. So it was very difficult for him to be able to get a job overseas. So he served a number of tours in D.C. because of that. He wanted to serve overseas, and he has, I think, in South America or in Latin America somewhere. But he just recently, I guess, where was it? Corey in Nogales? Yeah. So he got a job over there. But again, it's he's probably closer to the U.S. He's able to get his kid, if there's ever any needs that come up, he's able to get his kid back. These kind of things arise. But the normal career path is that you will go in, and your first 2 tours will usually be 2 years each. And normally within one of those first 2 tours, usually the first tour will almost always be a consular tour. In other words, you're going to be stamping visas somewhere. And that's always considered a fairly unglamorous type job. And, on TV and the movies, your rudest officers are always your consular officers. I'm here to tell you that that's not true, except for a few cases. But my first tour was as a consular officer in Taipei, Taiwan. At the time it was 95 to 97. We were Taiwan. Taipei was the second largest non-immigrant visa, in other words, visitor visa, non-immigrant visa post in the world. 360,000 applications in 1 year. And so from 7 o'clock in the morning until about 1 o'clock in the afternoon, you had this line that would snake around the block, go outside the building and snake all around the block of people day in and day out. And they were coming to your window, and you were trying to make a decision about them. And fortunately, in Taiwan, there's about at that time there was a 90+% issuance rate, so they were fairly safe bets. But everything has changed since 9/11 in the consular world. I have not worked consular since 9/11, so I can't give you too many details. But basically, Homeland Security runs the show, and everything is done now by appointment. You don't just go line up. You come in by appointment, have your interviews. It's a lot tighter, a lot harder to get a visa, depending on the country. Of course, if you're from London or Paris or something like that, though I don't know about London, but then it's a little bit easier to get a visa than if you're from Afghanistan or other places like that, Saudi Arabia or whatever. But it's a lot tighter show, and it makes the job a lot more difficult. But you have your consular tour within your first 2 tours, and those are called your JO or junior officer tours. For the first 3 or 4 years of your Foreign Service career, you're considered a JO or a junior officer. And you'll do your tours, and then you'll get your tenure somewhere within there. The first 4 years you'll get tenured, and then you'll almost always get your first and sometimes even second promotion. It's almost an automatic promotion after about a year. You come in, I think, as a, what is it? We came in as a FS5, and you get to be a 4 fairly quick, and then after 3 or 4 years, if you do a good job, you're a 3. Because it goes in opposite. The numbers go from 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1, and then after a 1, you go into your senior foreign service ranks. And then after your second, usually your second JO tour, your tours can be 3 years. After that, that's normal. Again, it depends on the post. There are some posts who are extreme hardship posts, like Afghanistan, which are mandatory 1 year. My wife and I were over there. We were there for 1 year, and then we re-upped, so to speak, for a second year. We're in the middle of our second year, but that was by choice. Normally, it's a 1 year post. Some of your more difficult posts are 1 or maybe 2 years. But most of them, after your JO tours, are 3 year posts. You can request a 4th, and I've even heard of some officers in unusual situations of a 5th year. Of getting a 5th, but they normally don't like to keep you at post longer than 4 years, usually 3. So the bottom line of that is that you're moving around, you're moving a lot, okay, and this has a huge effect. It can have a huge effect on your family and your family's well-being, and so you want to consider that. But that's why you joined the Foreign Service, to serve wherever the government wants you to serve, wherever your country wants you to serve. Normally, the normal career projection is you'll probably stay in FS3. After you make your FS3, you'll probably stay there anywhere from 3 to 6 years, and then you'll probably be a 2 from anywhere from, statistically, it's 3 to 7 years, and then a 1 about the same. And then you're supposed to, if you're not coming up for retirement or anything by that time, then you can elect, if you want to try to join the senior foreign service, which I think it's about, I want to say 15 or 20, maybe 25% of the foreign service officers who apply actually get to go in. I think it's about 25% actually make it into the senior foreign service. And these are again, your senior foreign service level people. Of course, all ambassadors would be senior foreign service. All ambassadors that are foreign service officers. Some ambassadors are appointed, or people who've made campaign contributions to the president, and they get appointed, businessmen or whatever. And those are political appointments. And I think there's about 30%. I want to say 30 or 40%, maybe, depending on the president. Can be political appointees, but most ambassadors, the majority of ambassadors, are senior foreign service officers. That's kind of a typical career projection. Foreign service officers, first and foremost, are considered generalists. We're generalists in our field, and a lot of them choose, at one point or another in their career, to kind of specialize, usually because it's easier. I mean, I could say that I specialize in East Asian affairs up until just a few years ago, and I decided to get out of East Asia and go see another part of the world. So I went to Turkey because there was a job in Turkey, in Adana, Turkey, and it was a great choice. I loved it because even though I love East Asia, and I probably will go back there someday, I want to go back, but it was great to go to Turkey because I got to serve in this very small consulate. There was 3 American officers in this consulate. We were in the southeast of Turkey, and we covered the entire southeast, which is where all the Kurds are, which is where all the action is in Turkey. And we got to cover the Habur Gate into northern Iraq, where there was a lot of a shipment of goods and materials going through that gate, and we had to handle the policy and political end of making sure that gate stayed open to our trucks. As well as handling the very, very sticky and difficult Kurdish issues that rose up in southeast Turkey. And again, I mean, that's a good example of some of the wonderful opportunities that the Foreign Service can offer somebody. I mean, I never would have dreamed when I joined the Foreign Service that I'd be doing some of the things that sitting down with a sheikh, talking about the local political affairs and the Kurds in the region and the dissatisfaction of the Kurds with the Turkish government, and what they expect the American government to be able to do for them, and sitting down with the operator of a local radio station who was relatively radicalized Kurds and criticizing the United States. I wasn't on the air doing this, but he did interview me, and we did talk about his criticism of the United States, of their policy toward the Kurds and so forth, and it sits you in a very difficult situation about having to come up with, why does the United States have this policy toward the Kurds, and why don't they, we're all for democracy, we're all for self-determination and so forth, and so why can't I give them a better, and it really gets you to thinking about, what it means to be a diplomat, because you have to, as a diplomat, whether you agree with it or not, and this is a very important point, it's something that I think all of you as future possible diplomats want to think about, and that is, regardless of who the president is and regardless of who the administration is, you have to speak and support publicly that administration's policy, whether you agree with it or not. And in the past, there has been, not for me, but there has been some of my colleagues who took great umbrage, if you will, at the current or at the administration's policies, and had a very, very difficult time representing that overseas. And some of them literally quit the Foreign Service because of it. You can get into a lot of trouble if you go out and say bad things about your president as a diplomat, as a representative of that president, international representative. So you have to make the decision whether you really agree with these things or not. For most of us, it's not an issue. I mean, that's what we signed on the bottom line for. And we're willing to go out there and make these statements. But it's exciting work, and it's something that I have never regretted. It's one of the best decisions I've made in my life. And let me just say in closing, just before I close here, I wanted to say something about, again, effects on family life, because I think that's important for all of us in this room who will likely, go on to international careers and possibly raise families overseas. And again, I should probably let my son talk because he has the most direct experience about this. But I really feel, as a father raising children overseas, that my children, on balance, there has been good and there has been bad about a Foreign Service career. The bad, of course, being always having to change, always having to leave your friends and make new friends. And that's difficult for a young person. It's difficult for all of us. But on balance, I think that my children have probably gained more than they've lost, because they've gone to some of the best international schools in the world, and they have had experiences that most young people will never have in their lives, being able to have exposure to foreign countries and languages and making foreign friends and so forth, that are just experiences that young people will most young people will never be able to have. And I think it's been great. But there have been some trials. There have been trials, just as you would expect. Ben, do you have any points to make on that? This is my son, Ben.
No, I think that was good.
Thanks, Ben. I paid him to say that. I mean, you can always hear, later in life, I wish that we would have done that, or we wish we would have done this differently or something. But I think that as I see my kids grow, I think that on balance, the advantages that they've had have far outweighed the disadvantages. And again, I have to say personally, for me, I am to a point in my career, my Foreign Service career, where as much as I love it, as much as I love being there, and I do enjoy actually being in Kabul, Afghanistan, even though my life is very limited to this, razor wire compound that I see every day and rarely get to go outside of. I really do enjoy working over there because the issues are so fascinating and they're so timely and they're so important. That's one of the reasons why I chose Kabul, Afghanistan, because these issues are right here, they're right now, they're important. And it's pretty neat to be able to work. I work in the political military affairs section at Embassy Kabul. I work with high-level military officers on a daily basis. And in my particular job, I cover Afghan National Army development and detainees. And detainees is a really, really sticky area, but it's one that I've developed some expertise in. And nobody wants that job, but I have made it into a job that I really, really enjoy. It was kind of difficult at first, but because it's one that everybody hates. Nobody wants to touch that job because it's, it's Guantanamo Bay and all these detainees, and what are we going to do with all this? But it's the job itself is interesting, and it's something, believe me, that everybody is interested in. You read about it almost on a daily basis right here in the newspapers. And I get to be a very small part of that in helping to kind of set some of the policy on that. These are some of the opportunities that you can have in the Foreign Service. And I'm speaking very narrowly here because this is from my experience. There's a world of experiences out there in public affairs. If you have any interest at all, for example, in public affairs, we need you. I mean, the Foreign Service, we have not done the greatest job in getting America's message out there. And public affairs is an exciting, important field that I think that our diplomacy really, really needs to emphasize more of. Both the technical end as well as the substantive end. There's a lot of need for it out there. Economic affairs, trade, economy, huge. Political affairs, all different aspects of political affairs. And one of my jobs in Hong Kong, I was the human rights officer. I was in Hong Kong just a few years after the changeover. I was the writer of the Human Rights Report for those years that I was there. The Human Rights Reports, the Trafficking in Persons Report, and the International Religious Freedom Report. I was the reports guy for both Hong Kong and Macau. And those were interesting, fascinating places. What was China going to do? How was China going to look at Hong Kong? What direction are human rights going toward in Hong Kong, in Macau, now that they're supposed to be special administrative regions of the People's Republic of China, and all these changes are being made. Exciting, fascinating things. How are elections going in Hong Kong? Because people don't get elected in mainland China, but yet this is part of China. But in Hong Kong, they do. How is Beijing viewing that? Fascinating issues you get to work on. This is real-time stuff, fun stuff, interesting stuff. Washington is interested in these kind of things. What's going on with the Kurds in southeast Turkey? They're causing trouble for the Turkish government. Turkish government is our ally. How do you handle these kind of things? How do you represent the United States to people who you consider your friends, the Kurds, but they consider themselves something separate from their own Turkish government, a lot of them? It's very sticky and very difficult, but also very satisfying and interesting at the same time. There's a lot of opportunities there and a lot of fascinating things you can do, and it's not all other government agency kind of excitement. But there is excitement in all the different agencies. But I can tell you, in the Foreign Service of the State Department as a diplomat, it's a very, very rewarding career, and I strongly recommend that if you have any inclination at all toward it, I suggest that you prepare yourself and take the test. That's all I'll say right now. Do you have any questions?
I have two questions.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
First, how much influence do you have over where you go? You had quite a say going to church.
That's a good question. How much influence over where to go? Normally, as a junior officer, you don't have much. You'll sit there for your first assignment out of A100. Later in your A100, I think A100 was like 2 months, 2 or 3 months long, and a couple of weeks before 2 or 3 weeks before you're supposed to leave, everybody has assigned a career officer in the department that helps to track your career. And junior officers have their own separate officer, and he or she will basically tell you there will be a list, and you will have an opportunity to put your choices. Is it Bujumbura, or is it? You're usually not the primo jobs for JOs. However, I was lucky. I was extremely lucky, because me and one other guy were the only Mandarin speakers in our whole 35-member A100 class, and there were 2 AIT Type A jobs. And guess who got them? Because they're going to try to match your language skills with it, so that they don't have to put you through language. They can get you out to the field sooner without putting you through the language training if you don't need it. So we got those, but everybody else, there was, I don't know. It just depends on what you're interested in. To me, they didn't really look all that greater jobs, but I knew where I was going from fairly early on. What influence do you have? There's always an opportunity to to bid on, we call it bidding, to bid on the jobs that you want. As a JO, you're probably going to have less say. After your first 2 assignments, when you're starting to go into your regular career assignments, you bid on a minimum of, what is the minimum number of bids is 6 or 7? There's a list that comes out for your rank. If you're an FS3, there's an FS3 list, and there'll be 5 FS3 lists, 1 for each cone. So by the time you're an FS3, you're going to be coned. Actually, by the time you join now, it used to be when I joined, you didn't get coned until later, but now you get coned when you're coming in. So you know that you're a political officer and you're an FS3, and you choose. You go down this list and you look at the capitals of the world that look great to you, and you choose at minimum of 6, and you can bid as probably as many as you want, up to like maybe 20, 25 if you want. It's kind of stupid to go more than about 10, because you're going to concentrate on 1 or maybe 2. And you bid high on like 1 or 2, and the other ones you'll be willing to take. You may not get any of them. I mean, if you bid Paris, Marseille, London, and Madrid, you're probably not going to get any of them, unless you are a 4-4 French speaker or whatever. So and have friends in Paris. But those are tough assignments to get. There's probably 80 or 90 or 100 people that bid on those at your pay grade. So yes, you can have a choice. And then what you do is within those few that you bid on, you campaign. It's an imperfect system, believe me, but it's what we do. And you bid on those positions, and then you start getting on the email. And if you know somebody in Paris that you want that job, you start emailing that person. And the person on the France desk, who the deputy director of the France desk is the person who's going to make that decision. It's always the deputy desk director, and you start campaigning that person. I feel sorry for that person because he's probably getting 85 emails a day from people who want that job, and you go after it. You start making phone calls, and it's just like applying for a job. I'm wonderful. I speak 4-4 French, and you really want me. And you have to campaign for the job. It's silly, but you think that there'd be a more rational way of doing it, but. Or you go the other direction where people, find they go down the list and they find these jobs that nobody wants to bid on. And they know they're going to get that job, and they make it easy for themselves. And, that's not actually a bad strategy, because they end up, some of these posts like, oh, who wants to go there? But they end up being pretty neat. And, and you don't have any problem getting those. If you want to bid high on one of those posts, you're our man. And there's literally hundreds and hundreds of posts to bid on. And you do that at the end of, on your if you're on a 3-year tour, at the end of your 2nd year, you start doing that and you start bidding. And you do have a say. Occasionally, you'll find somebody who bid on the wrong post, just right down the line, or they really have a bad reputation, because it starts having to do with your own reputation. They call it your corridor reputation. And if you have a bad reputation with people and you bid on the wrong post, then you're not going to get any of them. Then you either get the choice of trying to rebid on something else, or you get to let Washington tell you where to go, which you don't want to do that.
As far as your kids' schooling, does the government pay for that?
Sure. Yeah, that's the reason I stayed overseas. When I was in Tokyo, actually we were in Taiwan and Tokyo, I had 5 kids, and the schools cost $20,000 a year per child, $100,000 a year. Thank you, taxpayers. Of course, I pay taxes too. So, but yeah, and they're great schools. They're really good schools. Yes.
You were saying that at the end of a very long selection process, that if you get an offer, it's conditioned.
Mm-hmm.
Now, let's say that you're in the middle of a master's program,
Yeah.
or you're doing an internship or something like that. Can you defer?
Yep.
to a certain
Yeah.
point?
A lot of people do.
How long is the deferment available?
I don't know that there's a particular limit. I think they prefer to take your name off the list after a certain number of months, but you can maybe kind of try to negotiate that. It depends on how much recruiting they're probably going to be doing at the time. There was a time when they were starting up a new A100 class every 2 or 3 months, and if they knew that they're going to be doing that for the foreseeable future, And they'll say, okay, well, then we'll keep you in mind for class number 75 or class number 76 or something like that. When are you going to finish your master's? Well, I won't finish until December. Well, okay, we got a class starting up in January, so we'll consider you for that class or something like that, and we'll call you back or you call us back. Or they can do that. But if it's too far out, they're not going to go very far out, 2 or 3 years down the line, no. Right here.
You mentioned that you did a lot of reporting on political affairs. How did you gather most of your data?
Different ways. The normal way is you talk with government counterparts. Your host government counterparts. You go into the various ministries or whatever you're trying to do. If you're doing election affairs, you're going to go talk to party leaders, local party leaders. If you're doing, like I was doing in Hong Kong, was going to international religious freedom and human rights and things like that. I had some great opportunities to go talk with local Muslim leaders. It was right during 9/11. All of our emphasis was going up, on reaching out to Muslims, and so I got to go talk to all the local Muslim leaders in Hong Kong and find out all kinds of interesting things about Muslims in Hong Kong, which is amazing. You wouldn't think, but it is. And I got to go talk to the senior executive of Macau, Stanley Ho, and different people like that who were, on different economic and political issues, on election issues. We had the first election in Macau since the 1999 handover. Macau was handed over 2 years later after Hong Kong in 99, and there was the first free election in Macau, and we really wanted to see how Beijing was going to affect it, if there was going to be. So I got to be right there on the spot. We spent a couple days over there, just interviewing people, different party leaders, and so that's the kind of interviewing you do. Oftentimes you'll go to the government ministries, you'll go ministers in government. Right now in Afghanistan, I do detainee affairs, so I deal with the Attorney General, the Afghan Attorney General, who also happens to have the portfolio of kind of the main detainee person on the Afghan side. So I go to his office probably once a week. So it's that kind of thing. I mean, and if you're enterprising, you can talk to the taxi drivers to see how they're feeling about political affairs or what's going on the upcoming elections or what they're feeling like, the man on the street. Hard to do that in Afghanistan, by the way, because they don't let us on the street. You might get blown up. But it's and we've got elections now coming up. I heard they just made the decision. It was, I think, August 20th. They've got elections coming up. This will be their second set of elections, both parliamentary and presidential. So that's pretty exciting. So right now, the big issue right now is to election security and voter registration security is what's the big thing. We want to get people out to register to vote. In order to do that, they've got to come into a certain place, and that place has to be secure. The Taliban doesn't like that, so they make it insecure. So us and the Afghan National Army have to go in and make sure that the voter registration booths are all secure. And it's a big process, just to help create kind of a level of democracy in a place like Afghanistan that's so dangerous and insecure. This is the kind of stuff you get to work on. You talk with people at all levels. But the normal kind of thing is oftentimes diplomats like us will deal with local government or party or political leaders or religious leaders or whatever, local or business, whatever. When I was working the Kurds in southeast Turkey, we would go to local agricultural unions and mayors of the cities and party leaders and local sheikhs at the mosques and all kinds of people sitting there on this Turkish rug and offering you tea, thanks, and that type of thing. And it's just fascinating. It's fun work. It can be stressful at times too. Political. I'm a political officer, and like I say, I've done probably more than half of my political work has been political military. That's kind of a sub area of political military affairs.
Do you kind of specialize in
Well, you're supposed to be considered a generalist all the time, but yeah, people tend to. Like if I would probably have a specialty in East Asian affairs, East Asian politics, but I have chosen to kind of branch out also, and I also have kind of developed just over time a specialty in political military affairs because I like it. Here and then here.
Do you have that know the language before you go?
Yes and no. Ideally, yes. They want officers to be able to go fill a position, especially in a reporting position where you're having to interact with people on a daily basis. They want people to know the language, and they have a huge language training, as you know, probably at FSI, Foreign Service Institute in Virginia, Arlington, Virginia. They have this huge. I don't think they teach quite as many languages as the MTC, but almost. It's a big operation, and they try to teach people the language before they go out. And they have, depending on what you're doing, if you're doing a consular tour, it's usually a shorter language stint. They teach you consular Arabic or consular Chinese or whatever, which is usually a 5 or 6 month course. But normally it's a 44 week, course in the language. Unless it's Spanish, then you can do it in a week. No, sorry. No.
I was just wondering, why doesn't the U.S. government want diplomats to stay for more than 3 or 4 years?
Well, that's, again, another good question. And we asked the same question because, you kind of feel like after your second or third year, you're just starting to be really effective. It's because they don't want you to go. Basically, the main answer is they don't want you to go native. They don't want you to get kind of like too much into the local kind of culture, so that you become an apologist for that culture instead. And it happens a lot. It happens. I mean, you'd think that, well, gosh, you'd want your officers to be like, to be more, closer to that. But you have to maintain kind of a professional distance, because first and foremost, you're representing U.S. policy overseas. And that has to be your first instinct, is to always represent U.S. policy overseas. And it's easy to love the culture. We all do. We all love the cultures that we serve in. And sometimes it becomes, you get to the point where you're starting to advocate for them rather than advocating for American policy. I don't want to overemphasize that too much, but that's kind of the main reason, is they want people to be able, and plus they want you to again, to remain a generalist. They don't want you necessarily in your career, though many people do. They don't want you to get too specific into a particular area. A lot of people become like East Asia specialists, and they just spend their careers in China, Korea, and Japan, with an occasional career to Malaysia or something, a tour to Malaysia, whatever. But and that happens. But I like being a generalist. I know a little bit about a lot of things, but I don't have a lot of deep knowledge about anything. But I like it that way. Yeah. Yes.
Once you receive the post, you want to get like a graduate degree?
Mm-hmm.
Are you suggesting that before you even start with the foreign service, or they allow you to
Good question. There are opportunities at about mid-career for like 1 year, kind of 1 year terminal master's programs at various universities, usually some of the Ivy Leagues and some of the military schools like the War College and places like that. And that's, if you're like an FS2 or FS1, you're just about a few years away from coming up on maybe trying to go into the to the senior foreign service. If you choose to, you can apply to some of these programs and go get a master's degree. And it's usually in a specific area. If you want to go get a master's degree in art history, it's probably not going to do it for you. But if you're willing to go get a master's degree in international security affairs or international, economics or something like that, at one of these specialty kind of senior executive type programs, then yes, you can have it. There are instances that I've heard of where the State Department in certain situations will also fund, even PhD degrees and so forth. But you have to remember, it's one of these things where if the State Department's going to fund it, then they're going to expect at least a year of work out of you for every year that they pay for you to go to do that. And they can be pretty sweet. I mean, you get to go live up in, New York or Cambridge or someplace like that, and go up there and rub shoulders with some of the future world leaders and in these classes and future world policymakers and so forth in both the military and other agencies and so forth. And they're pretty neat programs. And you end up getting a master's degree out of it, but you're expected to kind of extend your service a little bit after that. Depends on the program, but they do have a lot of opportunities for that. Usually it's mid-career. No, I haven't heard of any situations where like a junior officer or a younger officer would like, go for 2 years to pick up a master's degree somewhere.
You mentioned earlier that your reputation kind of means a lot once you get
Yeah.
into the Foreign Service.
Yeah.
What would you tell somebody who wants to establish themselves and get a good reputation, let's say someone who's just entered the Foreign Service?
Well, it's pretty much like any organization. You got to kind of play by the rules. And I mean, there's a lot of there are a lot of big personalities and big egos in the State Department, and you have to learn how to deal with them. And a lot of these guys, these fast risers and so forth, and I freely and gladly admit that I am not one of them. But they can rocket up against ahead of you, guys that joined 4 or 5 years after you did, are now almost ambassadors or something like that after 10 years. And you think, wow, how did they do that? And they gamed it. They learn how to game the system. They know all the buttons to push, just like any big organization. But I'm in the Foreign Service to see the world, to represent the U.S. overseas, and I thoroughly enjoy doing that, and I think I'm pretty good at it. And so, everybody joins for a different reason. Some people join because I'm going to be ambassador tomorrow. Well, good luck. And usually they step on a lot of toes on the way up. I'm not one of those. I enjoy the Foreign Service for what it is. I take it a day at a time, and I love it. It's a great career. But how to stay, just be yourself and don't, do your job. And that's just like any organization. You just do your job. You keep your nose to the grindstone. You don't have to kiss up. You don't have to. You can still be a great officer. But the thing that determines all this is the dreaded EER, the employee evaluation in April of every year. Taxes and EERs. That's what we have to live with. But everybody in the Foreign Service knows that unless you are a real jerk, a really well-established jerk, that you're probably going to get a good EER, And it's all you have to do is keep from getting a bad EER, because all of your promotions and everything depend on that. And you may take an extra year or two to get promoted from a 3 to a 2 than your other a couple of your other A100 colleagues did. So what? In the end, it's all about the same. And it doesn't make that big a difference in salary. There's just a few $1,000s difference between an FS3 and an FS2, and within each salary range, within each pay grade, there's like 12 different steps, they call them. So an FS2 step 5 probably makes the same amount as an FS1 step 3. So even though this guy's an FS1 and he outranks you because he's lower step, I'm still making about the same amount of money as he is. So you don't. Another thing, big issue here: don't join the Foreign Service if you think you're going to get rich. You're not going to get rich in the Foreign Service. I mean, a guy my age with my experience, all of my peers. I can easily say that all of my peers, and I mean by peers, people about my age who have my level of education and who have been in their business about the same amount of time in the private sector, are easily in the 6-figure incomes by now. I'm not. That's the difference. But you get a lot of benefits. You get other benefits to make up for that. So don't think the Foreign Service is going to make you rich.
Is your role as the diplomat just to convey the interests of the United States and represent that, or is it also to, in your interactions with your tour or your place, to kind of give feedback to the United States and how to better interact with that country?
Yeah, you
you
help policymakers. You represent the U.S. overseas, and you help policymakers in Washington to make policy decisions. That's both of those roles, yes. I probably should have said that earlier, but you are the face of the United States overseas. Interestingly, the consular world, it's easy to talk smack about consular officers and so forth, but I have to say that they're probably one of the most important and most potent, if you will, parts of the Foreign Service as far as face-to-face, day-to-day diplomacy of people-to-people, right-on-the-ground type diplomacy that the State Department has. Because they are diplomats, but they're also meeting with everybody, every level of society, after a visa or whatever, they're meeting with those. Of course, another part of consular work is also American Citizen Services. They help Americans overseas as well. So it's a very, very important part of diplomacy, a very different kind of, it's not the kind that you see with the, with the cocktails and so forth like that. It's the day-to-day, meeting people, which can be very, very interesting. I had a very high level. As much smack as I talk about my consular tour, I actually did have a lot of fun in that, and I have to say that I probably, looking back on my career, in that 2 years of consular work, I probably had the opportunity to affect the face of the U.S. and to represent the face of the U.S. for good during those 2 years than I ever did during all my following 12, 13 years after that, even though I was on the cocktail circuit after that and, going out and meeting people and so forth. Just because you meet so many people and you have so much opportunity to do it. And if that's the kind of diplomacy you want to do, it's there for you to do. Consular is actually a pretty good way to go. Sorry, yeah.
Is there much crossover between public servant, foreign service officers into the private sector, into, say, legislative affairs and things like that, into the private sector?
You mean going from the foreign service into... There's a few foreign. Yes. There are a number of foreign service officers who choose to get out of the service and go into that. There are opportunities within the State Department itself. There is legislative affairs. We call it L office for legislative affairs, and that's all they do is they spend their days up on the Hill advocating for the State Department and for foreign policy issues. And if you're into that kind of thing, that's a great way to go. Because you're schmoozing with congressmen all the time, and you're doing all this kind of stuff, and you're going to the committees, and you're giving reports and all that kind of stuff, and you're letting them know what the current policy of the U.S. is. I mean, obviously, I take it for granted that all of you know that the State Department is the premier organization for setting and implementing United States foreign policy. Regardless of what other agencies might tell you, we are the ones who are responsible for that. Now, there's other agencies who want to try to do it their way, and we come up against them sometimes, but we are the ones that are responsible. When it comes to U.S. foreign policy in Afghanistan, Ambassador Bill Wood is the man. It ends and begins with him. He's the man, and he's the one who decides what Washington hears from Post. And that's the way it works.
You've been going for an hour.
Oh, man,
You haven't talked about stamina of diplomats.
Yeah, there you go.
Impressive.
Let me just tell you one joke that I told Corey before I came over here. This is actually a real situation. In my A100 class, and your little diplomatic soiree here with the reception that you're having reminded me of this. It's slightly off color, but I guess it's okay to say. In an A100 class, came to this section in our class where they were trying to teach us how to act as diplomats in a diplomatic, in a cocktail party or a reception. And it's important, especially for younger officers, to always be aware, and this is extremely important for junior officers, to always, to focus on the ambassador. You focus on the ambassador. You make sure that his needs are being met. I mean, you are his little goat, and you don't move. You don't do anything until that. This is what they try to impress upon. It's not quite that bad, but they tell you that you just have to hang in there and you watch his eyes and make sure that he's if he needs a drink, get him a drink, or make sure that he gets a drink and this type of thing, and you never leave his side, kind of thing. And we had this officer who joined the Foreign Service in my A100 class at the age of 58. He was 7 years away from mandatory retirement after 20-some-odd years with the New York Police Department, New York City Police Department. His name was Joe Galazzi, and he just sounded like a Joe Galazzi, And he was, he could have been all of our father's age, And retired, already raised his family. He was joining the Foreign Services for 7 fun years before he retired. And he was sitting in the back of the room, and one of the Foreign Service, one of the students asked the instructor, says, "Well, if we have to be always in the reception and we can never leave, what if you have to go to the bathroom?" And before she got an opportunity to answer, Joe pipes up from the back of the room and he says, "You wear a dark suit." And she goes, oh. Yeah, she was very prim and proper, you know. That's not the answer she wanted us young Foreign Service junior officers to hear. But the voice of experience spoke from the back of the room. But the Foreign Service is a great career, guys, and if you ever have a inkling to go into it, I strongly suggest you take that test if you haven't already and go on with it. I think you'll love it. And again, it's not only, I want to say in all honesty, it's not only the State Department. There are other agencies, like I said, Foreign Commercial Service, the other government agency, the CIA, the Foreign Agricultural Service, if you have any. And I noticed, you know, in your Bridges magazine and so forth, there's a lot of Kennedy Center graduates that go in that, and those are great, great careers. It's a different type of diplomacy that you do. I mean, you're out there you're literally getting, you know, dirt and soil under your fingernails and helping people. But that's a great way to do things, especially in places like Afghanistan where it's so important. Africa, Afghanistan, Latin America, places like that. But if you want to have an effect on policy, and if any of those kind of scenarios that I told you about that I've experienced, you know, the type of people that we sit down with and talk with and so forth, if any of that kind of stuff interests you, you know, I strongly recommend you go with the State Department. Thank you very much.